The morning it all began felt like any other. I was sipping coffee at the kitchen counter, flipping through emails on my laptop, when Claire breezed in. She looked radiant as always, her golden hair catching the sunlight streaming through the windows. She was wearing that blue blouse I loved, the one that always reminded me of our first date. Her smile was wide and easy, the kind that could melt away stress in seconds. I couldn't help but smile back. She had that effect on people, a charm that could fill a room with warmth. But that morning, the warmth felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the slight edge of nervous energy in her voice as she talked about an upcoming business trip. Or maybe it was the way she avoided meeting my eyes when I asked how long she'd be away. Just the weekend, she said, too quickly, as she busied herself with her coffee. She brushed off my questions with a breezy laugh. You're not going to miss me that much, are you? The phone buzzed on the counter between us. It wasn't mine. Claire's phone lit up, the screen flashing a message that burned itself into my brain. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again. Nick. For a moment, I froze. My mind raced to justify what I'd seen. Surely it was a misunderstanding. A joke between colleagues. Someone's idea of a prank. But the way Claire's hand darted for her phone, the flicker of panic in her eyes before she pasted on a too bright smile, told me everything I needed to know. What was that? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered. She glanced at the screen and laughed, too loudly. Oh, just a client, she said, tucking the phone into her pocket. You know how people can be. Always sending late-night emails. Her explanation didn't sit right, but I let it go. Confrontation had never been my strong suit. Besides, I told myself, Claire wasn't the type to cheat. We'd been married for 10 years. We had a good life together, with 2 beautiful kids, a lovely home, and a relationship that had weathered its share of storms. We were solid. Weren't we? But doubts have a way of creeping in, especially when you try to ignore them. Over the next few days, I noticed little things I hadn't before. The way she seemed glued to her phone, the sudden secrecy about her schedule, the way she deflected my questions about work. It was as if she built a wall between us, and every time I tried to peek over it, she added another brick. Then there were the nights she came home late, claiming she'd been stuck at the office or out with colleagues. Work's been crazy, she'd say, her smile tight and unconvincing. Once, she came back wearing a perfume I didn't recognize, and when I asked about it, she shrugged it off. A sample from a coworker, she said, laughing. You know how women love to share things like that. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the doubts kept gnawing at me, relentless and insidious. I couldn't shake the memory of that text message. Last night was unforgettable. The words played on a loop in my mind, eroding the trust I'd built over a decade. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat in our living room, staring at her phone on the coffee table. She was in the shower, humming to herself, completely unaware of my internal battle. My hands itched to grab the phone, to scroll through her messages and find the truth. But a part of me hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I found nothing and destroyed our trust for no reason? In the end, curiosity won. I picked up her phone and unlocked it using the password I'd seen her enter 100 times. My hands shook as I navigated to her messages. Most of them were mundane, chats with friends, reminders from her office. But then I saw his name, Nick. My stomach twisted as I opened the thread. The messages were casual at first, work-related, friendly. But as I scrolled further, the tone changed. Inside jokes, flirtatious comments, and then, unmistakably intimate exchanges. You looked incredible tonight. I couldn't stop thinking about you. And her reply, you're bad. But I like it. I put the phone down as if it had burned me. The room seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. The truth was undeniable now. Claire was having an affair. I sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. Memories of our life together flashed through my mind, our wedding day, the births of our children, the quiet nights spent watching movies on the couch. All of it felt tainted now, a cruel joke at my expense. When Claire came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp and loose around her shoulders, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. She kissed me on the cheek and sat down beside me, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Me too," she murmured. "Work's been exhausting lately." I didn't respond. My mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan. I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I needed more than just a string of text messages. If I was going to accuse her of infidelity, I needed proof. Irrefutable proof. And when I had it, she wouldn't see it coming. The days that followed were a blur of suspicion and planning. I moved through the motions of daily life, getting the kids ready for school, answering emails, making dinner, with a detached sense of purpose. Every interaction with Claire felt like walking a tightrope, balancing my need to maintain appearances with the seething anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Her upcoming business trip loomed over us like a storm cloud. She talked about it often, dropping vague details about meetings and conferences. I feigned interest, nodding at the appropriate moments, all the while storing every scrap of information for later. I needed to know everything, where she was going, who she was meeting, and most importantly, how I could expose her lies. On the night before her trip, I seized an opportunity. Claire had left her laptop open on the dining table, and curiosity got the better of me. I told myself it was necessary, that I had to know the full extent of her betrayal. Her email inbox was a goldmine. Among the countless work-related messages, I found a string of emails between her and Nick. They were careful, using vague language and euphemisms, but the undertone was unmistakable. One message in particular caught my attention. It was a hotel reservation confirmation, sent just 2 days prior. The dates matched her trip exactly, and the reservation was for 2 guests. My chest tightened as I read the details, a luxury suite at a 5-star hotel in the city. The kind of place we used to go for anniversaries. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. It was real. Claire wasn't just cheating, she was living a double life. And she thought I was too blind, too trusting to notice. But I wasn't blind anymore. That night, as Claire packed her suitcase, I made my decision. I would confront her, but not yet. Not without more evidence. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to see the destruction she had wrought. And for that, I needed to be meticulous. The next morning, Claire kissed me goodbye at the door, her suitcase in hand. She was radiant, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I watched her go, my heart heavy with a mix of love and loathing. How could someone I'd loved so deeply become a stranger to me? As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. I had hired a private investigator the day before, a man named Eric who came highly recommended. I had given him all the information I had, the hotel reservation, Nick's name, and Claire's itinerary. He assured me he'd have everything I needed within days. In the meantime, I started gathering my own evidence. I went through our financial records, combing through bank statements and credit card bills. Patterns began to emerge, charges at expensive restaurants, spa appointments, and boutique stores. Purchases she had never mentioned, made on days when she was supposedly working late. One particular charge caught my eye, a jewelry store in the same city as her conference. I called the store, pretending to inquire about a warranty for a purchase made by my wife. The salesperson was more than happy to provide details, describing the diamond necklace Claire had bought, a piece I had never seen her wear. My stomach churned as I thanked the woman and hung up. By the time Eric called with his findings, I was ready for whatever he had to say. His report was thorough, complete with photos and timestamps. Claire and Nick had spent the weekend together, just as I suspected. The pictures showed them laughing over dinner, walking hand in hand through the city, and entering the hotel late at night. My heart ached with every image, but I forced myself to look at each one, burning the betrayal into my memory. "It's all here," Eric said, his voice steady. "You've got more than enough evidence." "Thanks," I replied, my voice hollow. "Send me the files." Once I had the evidence in hand, I sat in my office, staring at the folder on my computer. It felt like holding a loaded gun. I had everything I needed to confront Claire, to blow up her perfect little lie. But I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more than confrontation, I wanted justice. Over the next week, I put the final pieces of my plan into place. I transferred half of our savings into a separate account, ensuring that Claire wouldn't have access to it. I contacted a divorce lawyer, who assured me that the evidence I had would work in my favor during the proceedings. I even drafted a letter to our children, explaining in the gentlest terms why their mother and I could no longer be together. On the surface, I maintained the facade of a loving husband. I greeted Claire with a smile when she returned, asked her about her trip, and pretended not to notice the faint scent of cologne clinging to her clothes. She seemed relaxed, even happy, as if she'd gotten away with her deception. But inside, I was counting down the days until everything came crashing down. The opportunity to set my plan in motion came sooner than I expected. Claire suggested we host a dinner party for friends and family, a chance, she said, to reconnect after her busy schedule. I agreed, hiding my smirk behind a sip of wine. The irony of her suggestion was almost too much to bear. As the day of the party approached, I prepared my stage. I printed copies of Eric's report, highlighting the most damning sections. I set up a slideshow on my laptop, carefully arranging the photos to tell a story of betrayal. And I rehearsed my speech, determined to keep my composure no matter how explosive the moment became. By the time the guests arrived, I was ready. Claire, oblivious to the storm brewing, flitted around the room, laughing and chatting with our friends. She was in her element, the perfect hostess. Watching her, I felt a pang of sadness for the life we could have had, if only she had chosen me instead of him. But that life was gone, and I wasn't going to let her pretend otherwise. Not anymore. Dinner was in full swing. The dining room hummed with laughter and conversation as our closest friends and family gathered around the long oak table. Claire sat at the head, radiant in her navy blue dress, sipping from her wine glass as she entertained our guests with a story about a recent work escapade. She was the picture of charm, her laugh light and carefree, as if she hadn't a single secret in the world. I sat at the opposite end, my mind a whirlwind of calculations. The envelope containing Eric's report was tucked under my chair, the slideshow ready on my laptop in the next room. My heart pounded with anticipation, but I forced myself to remain calm. Timing was everything. Dessert was served, a decadent chocolate cake Claire had ordered from her favorite bakery. She basked in the compliments, smiling graciously at the praise for her dessert. It was so quintessentially Claire, a facade of perfection carefully crafted to hide the mess underneath. As the plates were cleared and the guests leaned back in their chairs, savoring the last sips of wine, I stood. My movement drew the room's attention, and the chatter subsided into a curious silence. Claire tilted her head, her smile faltering slightly as she noticed my serious expression. "Everyone," I began, holding up my glass. "Thank you for joining us tonight. It's always a pleasure to share good food and even better company. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special, my wife." Claire's face softened, and she smiled at me. "Mark." I held up a hand to stop her. "Let me finish," I said, my voice calm but firm. Claire has been an incredible partner. She's worked hard to build a beautiful life for us, juggling her career, our family, and everything in between. I've always admired her strength, her dedication, her ability to make everyone feel special. The room broke into polite applause, but Claire's eyes flickered with unease. She knew me well enough to sense that something wasn't right. And tonight, I continued, setting down my glass, I'd like to share something with all of you. Something that's been weighing on me for quite some time. A ripple of tension passed through the room. Claire's smile froze on her lips. "Mark," she said softly, a warning in her tone. "What are you doing?" I ignored her and reached under my chair, pulling out the envelope. Claire and I have always believed in honesty. It's the foundation of any strong marriage. So, in the spirit of honesty, I think it's time we all take a closer look at the life we've been celebrating tonight. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photo, holding it up for everyone to see. It was a candid shot of Claire and Nick, laughing together over dinner. The room fell silent. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is Claire, my wife, with a man named Nick. They met a few months ago during one of her business trips. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then I started noticing little things, her phone, her emails, the lies about where she was and who she was with." "Mark, stop it," Claire hissed, rising from her chair, her face pale. "This isn't the time or place." I turned to her, meeting her gaze head-on. "The time and place, Claire, are exactly what you made them. Every moment you lied to me, every time you chose him over our family, you made this inevitable." I pulled out more photos, passing them around the table. Guests murmured in shock as they studied the evidence, Claire and Nick holding hands, entering the hotel, disappearing behind a door. Each image was a dagger to her carefully constructed facade. "This isn't real," Claire stammered, her voice shaking. "This is a mistake. You've taken things out of context." "Enough," I snapped, slamming the envelope down on the table. "No more lies. I hired a private investigator, Claire. I know everything. The dinners, the weekends, the money you spent from our savings to fund your little adventures. How long did you think you could keep this up? Did you think I was that blind?" Tears welled in her eyes as she looked around the room, searching for support. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. I never meant for this to happen." "But it did," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You made choices, Claire. Choices that destroyed the trust we built, the life we shared. And now, you'll face the consequences." I turned to our guests, who were frozen in stunned silence. "I didn't do this to embarrass her," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I did this because the truth deserves to be known. I loved Claire with everything I had, but love isn't enough when it's one-sided." Claire collapsed into her chair, her head in her hands. The room buzzed with whispers, the weight of the revelation sinking in. As the night wore on, guests began to trickle out, their awkward farewells a stark contrast to the lively greetings they had offered earlier. Claire didn't look at me once as she retreated to our bedroom, her steps heavy with defeat. I stayed in the dining room, staring at the empty table. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel never came. Instead, I was left with an ache, a hollow pain that no amount of justice could fill. But I knew one thing for certain, there was no turning back. The life we had was over, and all that remained was the fallout. In the quiet of the night, I prepared to move forward, leaving the ruins of our marriage behind. The house was eerily quiet the morning after the dinner party. Claire's absence was palpable, though she hadn't officially left. I hadn't slept, spending the night in the guest room, the echoes of last night's chaos playing on a loop in my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the confrontation, all of it had burned through me like wildfire. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of cold coffee, when Claire walked in. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and she looked years older than she had just hours ago. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Claire flinched as if I'd struck her. "Mark, please," she whispered. "We need to talk. What could you possibly have to say that you haven't already lied about?" I shot back, standing to leave the room. "We're done." "Wait." Her voice cracked, and something in it made me pause. "There's something you don't know. Something important." I turned slowly, narrowing my eyes. "What now, Claire? More lies? More excuses?" "No," she swallowed hard, wringing her hands. "It's not about Nick. It's about us. About our family." The bitterness surged back, tightening my chest. "What could you possibly say that changes anything, Claire?" Her lip trembled, and she looked down at the floor. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Carrie, she's not yours." The words hit me like a freight train. The room spun, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. "What the hell are you talking about?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Claire finally met my eyes, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "It happened before we got married. I thought it didn't matter. You've been her father in every way that counts." I stared at her, the enormity of her confession crashing over me. Carrie wasn't mine. My sweet, funny, brilliant daughter, the girl who looked up to me with those big, trusting eyes, wasn't mine. "Who?" I demanded, my voice cold as ice. "Who's her father?" Claire hesitated, and I could see the war raging in her mind. "It doesn't matter," she said finally, her voice pleading. "You're her dad, Mark. You're the only father she's ever known." "Tell me who," I said through gritted teeth. "Now." She looked down again, her hands shaking. It's George. George. My best friend. My confidant. The man who had stood by me at our wedding. The man who had laughed with me, shared beers with me, fixed my damn car. The betrayal twisted the knife even deeper. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. George. Of course, it's George. Why wouldn't it be? "Mark, please," Claire begged. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way." I shook my head, the anger boiling over. "You've taken everything from me," I spat. "My marriage, my trust, and now my daughter. You're unbelievable." "She's still your daughter," Claire cried. "She loves you. She doesn't know. She doesn't need to know." "That's not your choice to make anymore," I snapped. "You don't get to decide anything for me ever again." I stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, memories of Carrie flooded my mind. Her first steps, her first words, the way she'd crawl into bed with us during thunderstorms. None of that had changed, I told myself. She was still my daughter. But the doubt lingered, festering like an open wound. How could I face her, knowing the truth? How could I love her the same way, knowing she wasn't mine? When I finally returned home that evening, the house was dark. Claire was gone, her car missing from the driveway. On the kitchen table was a note, scrawled in her handwriting. "Mark, I'm sorry for everything. I've taken Carrie to my mother's house to give you some space. Please don't shut her out. She loves you more than anything." I crumpled the note in my fist, a mix of anger and sadness coursing through me. I had wanted Claire to leave, but not like this. And certainly not with Carrie. A knock at the door startled me, pulling me from my thoughts. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Eric, the private investigator, standing on my porch, a grim expression on his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked, frowning. "I found something else," he said, holding up an envelope. "I wasn't sure if I should share it, but, you need to see this." I took the envelope, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was another report, this one detailing a completely different affair, one that Claire had kept hidden even from Nick. It wasn't just George. It wasn't just Nick. There had been others. Many others. The shock was numbing, the betrayal almost too much to bear. But as I flipped through the pages, one detail jumped out at me, a note about Carrie's paternity. A DNA test Eric had run without my knowledge. The results were conclusive. Carrie was mine. I stared at the report, my vision blurring with tears. The ground shifted beneath me as the truth sank in. Claire had lied again, weaponizing my love for our daughter to manipulate me. But this time, her lie had backfired. Carrie was mine. She had always been mine. I dropped the report on the table and sank into a chair, my head in my hands. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. But amidst the rubble, one thing remained clear: I still had my daughter. And no matter what Claire had done, no matter how many lies she had told, she couldn't take that away from me. Not now. Not ever.